Why do Disney cast members point with 2 fingers instead of 1? The answer to that and other common questions about cast members coming up. People often wonder why cast members do some of the things that they do. Why do they point the way they do? Why do they have some of the mannerisms and gestures that they do? What are some of the other things that cast members do that aren't quite necessarily expected or normal around? And what's the reasoning behind that? Well, here's some of the more common questions that I get asked. I have people a lot of times who are wondering about what things look like backstage, and what about caution lines, and what do the utilidors look like, and the dressing rooms, and don't I have any pictures of that? Well, the answer to that is no. Cast members are not allowed to take photos of any area that is considered backstage. What's backstage mean? Basically any place that a guest cannot see in a normal experience while they're in the park. So any place that a guest shouldn't be able to see, pictures are a big no-no. Not allowed ever. And in fact, if you're even caught really with the camera out, you can actually be fired on the spot. Well, why is that? Part of that is because Disney is big on protecting the magic. They want to be able to keep the image and the atmosphere available so that people, when they come to the parks, can pretend that it's a different reality. Well, when you kind of show backstage and maybe people getting dressed or ugly utilidors, maybe the garbage dumpster areas, it kind of ruins the magic, and all of a sudden you've taken reality and stuck it on top of the imaginary, and it isn't quite as special and magical anymore. If you were to see cast members getting ready to go into work or lounging around in the backstage areas with a cigarette, it just isn't the same thing as when you see them out in the park with the guests, smiling and happy and everything. So pictures were not allowed backstage at all, ever. So, sorry, I don't have any pictures of backstage areas. I loved my job too much that taking one was never even a consideration for me, which says something when you're a photographer who loves taking pictures. Kind of related to that, can off-duty cast members use the utilidors in backstage areas? The answer to that is yes, with certain restrictions. If you're not working, you're generally not supposed to be backstage, although you obviously have to go there if you're on your way to or from work. If you're going in and say you were working a half day and you want to drop off your clothes and your lunch and stuff at your work area, that was certainly fine. Go backstage, drop your stuff off, and then go out in the park in your regular clothes, not your costume. That's another question I'll come to in just a second. But generally speaking, you weren't really supposed to be backstage unless you had business. That could mean visiting your managers, going to your work spot to get your work schedule. Doing some things like that were perfectly fine. Also, if you were visiting the park and you really wanted to eat at the employee cafeteria, that was generally allowed, not a problem. So you were allowed to do things like that. In fact, when I started working at Magic Kingdom, I actually spent a couple days that I wasn't scheduled to work just walking the utilidors, trying to figure out my way around and where things were and how to get there. Did actually have one manager stop me and, "Are you working? What are you doing?" "I'm a new employee and I'm trying to get my bearings and figure out where things are, so that way when I am working I'm not totally lost." And he was, "Oh, that's cool. Here, let me show you a couple things." So those kinds of things are allowed. But if you're hanging around backstage just for the sake of being backstage, nope, no go. You could always tell somebody, though, who wasn't working when they were backstage because they obviously weren't wearing their outfit. So if you were backstage on some of your time off, it meant that you had to have your ID out where people could see it. So that way they knew that you were a legitimate employee. That's one of the reasons we had cast lanyards, is because if we were going to go backstage on a time when we weren't in our costume, it was immediately put the lanyard on, have your ID out there hanging. That way they were able to spot if somebody wasn't supposed to be back there. And it made them a lot easier for them to catch them and run them off. So IDs were a big thing backstage. Always had to have it. You were actually supposed to have this on you anytime you were at Disney, even if you were just there as a guest, because that showed that you had legitimate reason to be there. If you went into work, you had to show your ID or you weren't even getting in. So always had your ID with you. So what about wearing costumes when you're out in the park? Can you go ride rides in your outfit and on your breaks? No. If you are wearing your costume, you are working, which means you're supposed to be where you are supposed to be working. On your breaks, you were not supposed to go out into the park and play. That was your time to relax backstage where guests couldn't see you, cool off, eat, take care of whatever business you might have, but not with the guests. If you had a really long day and ended up with a really long break, which did sometimes happen, you kind of sort of had the option to change into your regular civvy clothes, run out, try and do something real quick, and then try to come back. You weren't supposed to do it, though. You really were supposed to be in your break area in case they needed to find you. And if you came back late and unprepared, you were going to get in big trouble. But you were not supposed to be out in the park in your costume. In fact, you really weren't even supposed to be out, say, grocery shopping after work or before work in your costume. It happened because that's what we had to do. We weren't always changing at the park. Not everybody had a locker. That was kind of the deal, is if you were not working, it was kind of frowned upon to be in your costume. And if you were in the park and you were in costume, you could actually get terminated because at that point you were not employed and it caused insurance issues and guest relations issues and all sorts of other stuff. So was not allowed. Another question I get asked often, why do cast members only have their first name on the name tag? Well, this is actually a tradition that dates all the way back to Walt Disney himself. Walt felt that the people working at the park, the cast members, really need to be on a first name basis, regardless of their position. And so even Walt, when he was in the parks, he was Walt. His name tag said Walt on it. He was not Mr. Disney, and if somebody actually came up and said, hey, Mr. Disney, he would correct them. My name is Walt. From that point on, every cast member goes by a first name basis. Always. Whether it's the lowliest, brand new starting people working ride ops or cleaning the sidewalks, all the way up to the presidents. When I was there, the president of Magic Kingdom was Phil. Yeah, we knew his last name, but if you saw him in the park, it was Phil. And that's what you said. Hey, Phil, how you doing? So always on a first name basis, and that's the only thing they put on your name tag. They would also do something else with name tags, as you can see on this one, is they would oftentimes put our hometown, or if you were a college program student, they would put the college that you were attending. That was to give guests something to be able to strike a conversation with. Hey, you're from Sacramento? So am I! We could immediately have a common bond and be able to start a conversation with that and then open up doors to be able to do other things with the guests. And so it was just kind of a way of being able to let the guests get to know us, help us to be a real person in their eyes and not just some robot. That's why first name basis and locations. Are you allowed to say, I don't know? This is another one that comes up a lot. If a guest walks up to you and asks a question as a cast member, are you allowed to say, I don't know? And generally, the answer is no. You had to know the answer, and if you didn't know the answer, then you were obligated to find the answer. Now, if they did ask something and your natural response is, I don't know, you were supposed to immediately follow it up with, I'm not sure, but I'm going to find out for you. So let me make a phone call. Let me go ask somebody over here. Let me check out. I'm going to get you the answer. Even if I don't have it at the moment, I will find it and make sure I've got it. It's one of the reasons we used to carry around these things called telecasts. And this would actually have all of our information for the park. It would have show schedules, character meeting times, emergency numbers, and all sorts of other information there. So if we did have a guest come up and ask us something, we could pull this out and say, here, let me look it up for you. These were not for the guests to have. These are simply and only for cast members to use. But the amount of information that they have crammed in these little things is pretty amazing. What about some of the gestures? I get asked all the time about the Disney point. What's up with the 2 fingers and do you still do it? Yes, after over 7 years since I last worked at the park, I still do the Disney point. It is a habit. I don't always do it, but it's probably about 75% of the time. It's just a natural thing that you find yourself doing. And it's a hard habit to break, and there really isn't any reason to break. Why do we point with 2 fingers? Well, the simple answer is because in many countries and cultures, pointing with 1 finger is considered rude. And Disney does not want us using rude gestures. And so they teach you and train you early on to avoid a lot of common ones. Pointing is obviously the most well-known one, but there are others. Here in America, we have a gesture we call the OK sign. That is an extremely rude, obscene gesture in other places of the world. And so you're immediately told, don't do that. Ever. And you learn some of the other things like that, so you learn what not to do that might accidentally insult somebody or offend them. You learn about body space and how close is appropriate and comfortable, and that if somebody from, say, the Middle East comes up and they're right here, it's okay. They're not being rude. That's normal for them. The point is another thing. Places have different rules about pointing, so Disney really drills into you right away to, when you're giving directions, watch how you point and give directions. They actually encourage the open hand point. Hey, what you're looking for is going to be right over that direction. You're going to want to head over that way and do that. But for a lot of us, that's just not natural. That's kind of weird. I mean, I'm not doing karate. That's kind of what it feels like. The biggest alternative, and that you will actually see the most often, is the two-finger point. Hey, you want right over there. I constantly do that. Even when I end up working at other parks, I still would use the two-finger point. It's just a habit you get into. But it's a good way to make sure that you're not accidentally offending somebody, and trying to be sensitive to other cultures besides your own. Because that's something that Disney really tries hard to do. Disney gets visitors from all around the world. And yes, they're coming to America, but they're coming to a place that's non-cultural, if you will, or internationally cultural, because it's for everybody, regardless of who or what they are, or where they're from, or how old they are. And so you want it to be a safe place for everybody. Part of that is gestures, and making sure that what could be considered rude in some places doesn't show up at Disney and accidentally offend somebody. There were a couple gestures I used to use growing up that were just natural to me, and I found out later on that they weren't necessarily natural in all places. That's where the point comes from. That's the reasoning behind it, and like I say, it quickly becomes a habit and something that you do all the time. And hey, it's kind of a hallmarker of cast members. That way. And one of the most important questions I get is, why are those cast members so happy all the time? Well, most of the time they actually are happy, but you are actually drilled, even at traditions, which is your introductory class, to smile all the time, to make eye contact with the guests, and to go out of your way to be able to reach out to the guest and make a bond. Smiling is huge. I actually remember one funny moment in our traditions class where we're sitting there at all these round tables and the instructors come in and they're all bubbly and happy and everything, almost over much. It was kind of scary for a few people. And the first thing they did is, okay, everybody, smile. Not everybody's in here smiling. We know some of you don't feel like it, but first task of your job, smile. And they actually went around and said, good smile, good smile. Okay, you're obviously in pain. Good smile. You look like you're constipated. And we actually had a few minutes where we were taught how to smile. Just something as simple as that. Because when you are at Disney, they actually want you to smile all the time, if at all possible. Especially if you are on stage. If you're where guests can see you, you should be smiling. That doesn't mean that we're robots and we always smile. There are definitely times you don't. It was amazing the effect that a smile could have on the guests coming in, as well as on other cast members and people around you. I can remember a few times when I was out on the middle of Main Street or other places, just kind of doing my job, and you just kind of get into a routine sometimes, and you kind of forget what you're doing. Guests coming by, hey, smile. Oh, sorry, thank you. Smiling at me, and then you pass it on to somebody else. Because smiles are contagious. So smiling was huge. What was really funny is when I first started at Disney, even though a lot of times I'm a happy person, if I get backstage in real life, there's a reason I have all the grumpy shirts, because I'm not always a really happy, upbeat person. Really. And so when I first started at Disney and I was smiling for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, my face would actually hurt by the end of the day. Because I was using all these muscles on my face that I wasn't used to using that much. So you would come home and your wife and kids, how are you doing? Good. My face hurts. Your face hurts? Yes, I'm smiling too much. And then usually somebody go, well, that's good. Your face hurts me too. Family joke. There you go. So smiling was a very important part of work. So there's some of the rules, regulations, and customs that we had as cast members, and a little bit of the reasoning behind some of that. Hope you found that interesting. What other questions do you have, or what things do you wonder about? Why does a cast member do what they do? I'd love to hear them. Please leave them in the comments and feedback below, and I'd love to be able to use them for a future video. If you want to know more about me as well, check out my Facebook page. I've got a fan page set up. I've got a website. I've got merchandise available. Hey, cool shirt, isn't it? Check out all those links down below in the description. Thank you as well to my patrons for your support. Without their financial support, I wouldn't be able to upgrade equipment and go on some of the trips I do and do a lot of what I do. So thank you so very much to my patrons. I love you to death. If you want to know more about Patreon and supporting me, please be sure to check out the links below as well. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless. Okay, this is cast member manners and customs. Clapping because I have no microphone because I'm that good. Using onboard sound. I'm just... Okay. Anyways. And people wonder often about... That's not even what I have written down. I'm just like off in la la land. Okay. I thought it'd be fun to address a few of them here for you. As I get text messages. Yes, that's a Doctor Who thing. Yes, 10 years after having left the park. It's not that long. Yes, over... I don't remember how long since I worked. I'm getting old. Thank you to my... Oh my God. Okay. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right there. If you'd like to see another great video of mine, there's a good one right there for you. And if you'd like to be like these wonderful people and support me on Patreon, hit that link right there. Thanks so much.